Um, Actually, for myself, I started out actually in one of the bigger law firms that point of time, one of the bigger law firms as a pupil, and I had the fortune of having very good pupil masters. They involved me in various aspects of their work. They brought me to meet clients. They asked me to help assist them in the drafting of certain submissions to court. And in fact, in one of the court hearings, I was allowed to speak or deliver some of the submissions to the judge because the judge wanted to hear from my perspective.
All right.
And
From Singapore common law, I mean, usually I thought common law is that you have to be a barrister to.
yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
So even as a pupil, I had that really unprecedented privilege of doing that in court. And it
Right.
was a high court judge who asked me the question.
Okay.
And I did say that I'm actually a pupil, I do not have speaking rights in this court. And he said, doesn't matter, I want to hear what's your view.
Right.
And I delivered some of the submissions. And eventually on that day, that was the first time I spoke in court. I was trembling in fear. I was really surprised because, yeah, as pupils, we don't usually speak up, and it'll be many years later before you're even allowed to deliver some of the submissions as well as some of the points that you want to bring across to the bench.
Right.
Okay. And then close towards the end or towards the midpoint, of my pupillage, there was an opening in the Attorney General's chambers, and that gave me an opportunity to partake in this public life, in this public work. The work is very, I would say it's very enriching and very rewarding. The chambers, they treat us very well. I have many very good mentors inside it. But a part of me felt that the world is not just about Singapore. I wanted to have the opportunity to venture outside of Singapore's shores. And that opportunity presented itself about 3 years to 4 years of my, while I was in chambers. And at that point of time, there was a joint venture being formed, and it was a collaboration between a Singapore investor as well as Chinese partners.
When you were a prosecutor, your task was with corruption, financial, commercial offenses. You're dealing with a lot of litigation, trial advocacy, advisory work that you give to the Corruption Practice Investigation Bureau. You also basically work with law enforcement, of course, and you handle a lot of Singapore high-profile financial fraud, money laundering, corruption, bribery case. And this is all about, I mean, the reasons I'm intrigued is because the Sea Integrity Community is all based on the area of white-collar crime, and this is all white-collar crime. Has it changed in terms of white-collar crime all these years? In a way where right now we all talk about technology all day to day conference. Has it, you know, in terms of behavior, greed, or you know, the action of crime, has it changed in the last 10, 15 years or so, that after you being a prosecutor and right now you know, heads up a company legal functions, what you've seen so far?
I think we have to appreciate that Singapore is part of a larger community. And the larger community is actually Asia. Asia, we have, of course, having many different countries and jurisdictions, we have different customs and practices. But largely, there's some intertwining threads that run the same throughout each country, each Asian country. And one of them is about relationships, familial relationships, or even business relationships. We call it guanxi. And that's a very important factor of our life. In terms of guanxi, right, there are many facets to it. One of the facets to it is hospitality and gifting. In some countries, they have turned it into, there is a intent to, there is corrupt intent in order to extract that gift or that favor. But in some other jurisdictions, it's freely given. So the question here is always when such an offense happens, right, whether there was such a corrupt intent involved. And it is not an easy task to sieve out such an intent. Of course, we looked at it by conduct, we look at it through the actions and the correspondence and so forth. And I think technology, when we talk about technology, right, it sort of assists as well as shields or debilitates the ability to actually sieve out such offenses. Because some of these offenses happen, like say if they happen on text, like WhatsApp or Weixin or WeChat, then it's easily traceable in a sense because you can actually download excerpts or parts of that or the text that actually show such intent, corrupt intent. But when it happens like when you use like technology to actually assist you in the sense that there are some technologies that they're like sort of like produces an EMP blast or like disable some other technologies from happening or working in the area at a region for a point of time while the conversation is happening, then obviously you won't have any traces of that. Crime is usually a few immutable bases. For instance, greed, corruption. They do not, even if technology changes, they don't change over time. And this one, technology only helps to enhance or facilitate the commission of the offense. So even right now as we speak, even though there's a lot of cleanups going on in, say, China, for instance, there are still instances of that happening even just across our borders with our neighbors. So there are many examples, and I think you can easily find that on the social media or on the internet. And I think that doesn't take away the very fact that it is the nature of some of these people to actually continue to commit such offenses. And if you leave it unchecked, in Singapore, why corruption is so low is because we actively pursue to prosecute it. We actively reduce the number of offenses that, or at least the first instance that we hear of such an offense is almost no tolerance. And in that respect, right, the number of offenses that are committed in the field of, say, corruption is relatively low. And that goes the same for drug trafficking. The moment that we take a tolerant approach, that's where the problem arises. That's where the amount of offenses is likely to going to shoot up. Because people are going to try to push the limits,
Absolutely. Singapore has a very stringent law on drug offenses. You work with organizations that have thousands of employees, but more to that you also basically listened to cases or manage cases back then that are fraud or corruption related. Is there anything that is extraordinary, case that you don't have to share the case, I'm just saying that, technique or people are using to defraud or a scheme they put together to defraud people?
There are many instances where some of these offenses are committed by people who perform the acts that are seemingly legal by nature. So for instance, there was a certain company that held under the guise of multi-level marketing, which is legalized in Singapore.
Yep.
But in actual fact, there was no real product or service being provided. The service, so-called, that they professed to do so was actually in the form of recruitment, and of course they use a very measly product that actually has no real value. That was just, by the way, they just pulled this in to try to make it, to legitimize it.
Yep.
But in actual fact, it was like what you said, it's actually a pyramid scheme. And quite a number of people were affected by it. Yeah, I think you probably would be aware of this organization if you do a search on it. And I think there are many other such organizations as well, where there's just money passing through hands, the people at the top just receiving money, and the bottom people, they're like struggling to, find more people to enter this scheme. And in the end, actually, they found out that actually they're losers. They're the one who's losing the money because they're unable to continue the same actions as the top. Yeah. So it's always the bottom few, the end few who join this scheme, who are actually the people who eventually are the victims, in that sense.
So what would you advise for a general counsel if they basically do have allegation or whistleblower basically say something, what is the first course of action when it really, they need to react to it, right? Or they don't? What do you usually do if you basically get an allegations? You do need to basically investigate internally whether or not this is actually just, I guess, a fake story or whatsoever.
I'm very proud of our country's law enforcement agencies.
Yep.
That includes the CAD, Commercial Affairs Department. That includes the CPIB, the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau. Many of them are talented individuals who would probably make it quite far in the corporate world, but they choose to sacrifice a bit of their time and efforts and skill sets in order to contribute to Singapore's safety. So in that respect, and also given that we have a zero tolerance towards corruption, every report or every complaint that's made is usually looked into. And of course, recommendations are always made after the initial investigations. And these investigations, these reports are actually forwarded to the heads of department, and the heads of department will consult together with the Attorney General's chambers. And there is actually, at every level, there's a lot of checks involved. So whether this case deserves more investigation or whether there is sufficient evidence to warrant a prosecution, it really depends on case by case, but nothing is left unturned. So along the way, there are many, many parties involved, and many parties are vested, they have vested interest to make sure that Singapore remains corruption-free.
Now, let's talk about your next move now. You moved to Chengdu, like just for a hospitality firm, and you don't just resume a legal role, but as a business role. I think for a successful general counsel to get ahead or to basically be more efficient. After when I talked to so many in-house counsel, I realized one thing, that those that did very, very well, they need to understand the core business fundamental on how they generate revenue, how they do business with other people, how they create product, innovate, etc. and that sort of thing. In order for you to basically formulate a legal strategy for the company to grow or minimize risk. Do you agree?
The role has allowed me insights into various aspects of the whole entire process, much more so than if I was just a lawyer in the background. And as we all know, most general counsel or most lawyers, they don't usually have to or usually are involved in the negotiation process or initial sourcing of business and so on and so forth. So having the opportunity to be involved in all these various processes, right, allowed me greater insight into how some policies ought to be structured, how certain deals and contracts ought to be crafted, and also how we should manage or deal with these such partners for future cases as well. So it lays the groundwork very much so for me to better facilitate the structuring of the company, number one. Number two, it allowed me the ability to draft more relevant standard operating procedures, more policies that are more closer to the hearts of the people on the ground. And number three, I think most importantly, right, is how, as general counsel, how we can support the business to grow, in a sense that for certain aspects or certain businesses, we have to directly negotiate, and that's how we keep in mind, the process, the business, the objective, the ethos of the business, and we make it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
How long ago were you in China?
I was back in 2013, so I was there for about 3 years, from 2010, 2011.
Okay, 2011 to 2013.
Yeah.
Right. What annoys you the most when you're operating in China as a general counsel? Not as a business person. That's another part of the story. They probably annoy you more.
Okay, one of the things that annoyed me, or at least frustrated me a bit, was that many of the deals that were actually sealed or brokered didn't go through proper contracting procedures. So
Right.
as we know, contractual procedures is like we draft up maybe a markup, and we send it over, the other person marks up, and then we have a sit down and we talk about the terms and conditions, and we mallet the whole thing, you know, make sure that it's properly hammered out, you know, word for word and properly structured kind of clauses. But in China, the way you negotiate is over meals, drinks, informal gatherings, and after that it slowly evolves into more formal gatherings. So it's like a courtship of sorts,
That's right.
in a sense that initially it'll be like strangers getting to know each other,
Yeah.
and then later on you get to be more familiar. Then you go out for more discussions, talks, and only later at the final step, then you will see something like a contract being formed. In the sense that finally there's some paper involved, but the process to reach to that paper, right, may sometimes take weeks and months, and sometimes may not even happen at all. So that's the frustrating part of it, because at the point of time you're always thinking, at the beginning part of time you're always thinking that, you know, you'll reach there somehow. But surprise and surprise, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Is that enforced most of the time?
Okay, so the other part about drafting and contracting in China, right, is that many things are written generally. They're not so specific obligations like you put this, we put this, and therefore, because of this exchange, therefore this happens. Sometimes it's just worded very generally like party so and so shall observe punctuality in the delivery of goods. But it doesn't say like what time, what are the dates, and what time to avoid, what times are they to avoid, so on and so forth. So a lot of things is left open to interpretation and of course second guessing. But that's how it is, or at least it was in my experience for drafting a lot of the clauses in China. And another part of it that I found that was very unique was the part where most Chinese parties want a mediation clause. In terms of dispute resolution, right, in the sense that when parties argue or dispute over a certain thing, whether that contract has been breached or whatever, they want to have a clause that they can fall onto that allows them to 协商, mediate. And very often it may not even end up in court, or it may not be even drafted into the agreement that you can actually go to court. But it just sometimes just stops at there, it's like 协商. And I think that's a very important part of our Asian culture, in a sense that unlike...
And now there is a lot of fuss about third-party risk. To be fair, you know, 10, 12 years ago, third-party risk wasn't an issue. And right now, you know, even for us, every time we do business with someone else or somewhere else, we have to fill up a lot of forms. They have to basically do due diligence on us before they decide that they can do business with us or not. And I'm pretty sure the same for you as well, that right now, third-party risk is basically one of the risks that on top for most of the company. So what would your advice be when it basically comes to third-party risk? Especially when you know, for example, you work in China, and doing due diligence in China is almost impossible.
I see your point, and in some respects I do agree. But of course there are some areas where you can mitigate that risk or to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And I think it's about KYC, know your client. Of course, form filling is one part, but another part which, as all Chinese businessmen always advocate, is getting to know the person, in the sense that you don't only just know the person just because he's sitting on the other side of the negotiation table, but rather, you know, involve him in gatherings, involve him, or at least engage him or her as if you were to court, you know, your own lifetime romantic partner. In the sense that you get to know his personality, his friends, and probably even his family as well. And once you reach to that point, right, then you truly know how a person is like. And of course, the person is not only representative of the whole entire company. So as much as possible, and if you can, those people who you feel that have a strong impact or influence over your contract or your business dealings, right, get to know these people. So these people, getting to know these people is about knowing them as people in a sense that, you know, you understand what they like, what they dislike, you know, all the way from, you know, probably their parents all the way to their children.
I want to talk more about corruption, but I think that is the endless subject that, regardless what age it is, there will be people commit corruption act.
And they always be in various forms and various schemes and plots and all that. And it's usually fueled by a sense of greed.
Mostly a greed.
Yeah.
Mostly opportunity.
Yeah.
And mostly because they can.
Yeah. And also is also a factor of culture.
Yep.
Whether the surrounding culture where the person grew up in allows such activity, or you know, molds the person to be able to accept such activity in their lifestyle.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this is hard to solve, but anyway, as people get educated or I guess educated more on I guess risk management or fraud risk management, you know, a lot better in terms of mitigating this kind of risk. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I will interview again in a couple of years, and we'll see how we progress, and that's basically what the project is all about. Thank you so much. Get involved in the Sea Integrity community. Okay, this is Adrian Ooi. Thank you.
Thank you.